Listen to episode 612 of the LanternCast, where I join Chad and Mark to talk about Fantastic Four First Steps, as well as the future of the MCU. Link in the description. Hey everybody, it's time for another round of your questions. If you've got a question that you'd like answered, leave it in the comment section of this video, and it might appear in a future Q&A just like this one. Excalibur asks, since the Emerald Flame and the Crimson Flame are the names of the will and rage of the Starheart, what would the fear, hope, and other emotions of the Starheart be called, and what do you think the other Golden Age lanterns of those emotions look like? Would they be more carbon copies of Alan Scott like Vladimir, or look differently? You can say whatever you want about it being true to the way characters were designed in the Golden Age. I still really dislike the idea of making a villain look like a palette swap version of the hero. I don't like it whenever the Flash does it, and I don't like it here. But at least there's an attempt at justifying it within the story. The Russian government wanted the Red Lantern to infiltrate America under the guise of being a hero, so copying the appearance of the Green Lantern was an intentional choice to make the public think of the Red Lantern as a hero, since he looks exactly like the hero that everybody already loves. I'd like to think that if there were more Golden Age lanterns powered by different aspects of the Starheart, they'd all look very different. There's a very cool homemade quality to a lot of Golden Age costumes, where they're just odd enough that you can tell this person had to figure out how to throw this all together themselves. Even Alan's costume was the result of him wanting to make the most outlandish thing possible, so he'd be sure to stand out. I hope we'd see something like that with the other Golden Age lanterns. Unique designs that reflect something about their goals or about them as individuals. As for what I'd call them, while Emerald and Crimson are great names, I think the move is to just call the rest by the common names for their colors. I think it would be cool to call the Blue Flame the Cerulean Flame or something like that, but it's way easier and less confusing to just call it the Blue Flame, you know? Deacon Caudill asks, how would you feel if a teen or young adult character became a Red Lantern of Earth? They'd have control over their powers and act as a new hero wearing a well-known villain suit. What conflicts do you think would happen? That'd be great, actually, especially since the heightened emotions of the teenage protagonist could make it easy to slip and lose control of the power. It's very common to use superpowers as a puberty metaphor, and I can't think of a clearer case than giving a Red Lantern ring to a high school student who's struggling to figure themselves out. Lycos asks, did Guy Gardner ever wear a yellow ring? I've seen glimpses of it before, but no one talks about it online. Yes, he had it for a couple years in the early 1990s. Guy and Hal got into a big fight, and the loser had to give up their Green Lantern ring, and Guy lost. But Guy still wanted to be a superhero, so he hitched a ride to Oa and stole the yellow ring from Sinestro, who was dead at the time. So Guy got to be a Lantern again, but this time there was nobody to boss him around. The problem is that the yellow ring itself wasn't actually that great. The ring was built by the Weaponers of Quard, and they'd never made a power ring before, so there were problems with it. For example, the ring had AI that could answer questions, but only in the Korrigarian language spoken on Sinestro's homeworld. They didn't see this as a problem since the ring was specifically intended for Sinestro. And then there's the fact that the Quardians never built Sinestro a battery, so Guy had no idea how to even recharge his new ring, which would start to randomly fail due to low power. He eventually figured out that the yellow ring gets its power by leeching it from Green Lantern rings, which again wouldn't have been a problem for Sinestro since he fought Green Lanterns all the time. That just meant Guy had to keep picking fights with his old friends in the Green Lantern Corps, which he probably would have done anyway. Guy got the yellow ring and then immediately got his own ongoing series. First it was called Guy Gardner, then changed its name to Guy Gardner Warrior starting with issue 17. The yellow ring was destroyed in issue number 21 by Hal Jordan during the Emerald Fallout storyline that took place between Emerald Twilight and Zero Hour. The reason why it never comes up in the comics and why nobody really talks about it is probably because of who wrote it. The first 8 issues of Guy Gardner, plus the 3-issue miniseries that led into it, were all written by Gerard Jones, who ended up going to jail for something that I'm not going to get into here. Thing is, he was an incredibly prolific Green Lantern writer who was responsible for every Lantern thing that came out from 1990 through 1993. And in just 4 years, he wrote 8 issues of Guy Gardner, 3 issues of Guy Gardner Reborn, all 18 issues of Green Lantern Mosaic, 47 issues of Green Lantern, 5 issues of the Emerald Dawn miniseries, 6 issues of the sequel miniseries Emerald Dawn 2, and he had stories in 6 issues of the Green Lantern Corps quarterly anthology series. It's a ton of comics, and it's kind of become this lost era of Green Lantern that nobody wants to acknowledge because of the writer. I still go back and forth on it. I don't think it's right to just bury and forget all the work done by a problematic creator who works in a highly collaborative medium like comics, because you end up punishing tons of other creators by association who did nothing wrong. Yet there's also a part of me that thinks the best way to handle a problematic creator is to acknowledge the impact their work had on you and then move on with your life, because the world is full of other non-problematic creators whose work deserves more attention. So I'm not sure what the answer is to all of it, but that's why that whole period of Green Lantern history has been buried. Atticus says, I've never understood why Ultraviolet is the only Lantern Corps of the invisible spectrum. Is there a reason for that, and do you think there's potential for more Corps to be added in the future? Yeah, it really seems like they wasted a lot of different emotions on one single power, doesn't it? I kind of wish they just picked one emotion that's powerful and universal, like regret or something, and just made that the Ultraviolet power. Something that would make a lot of sense is if the Ultraviolet Lanterns are the Unseen Spectrum's equivalent of the White Lanterns. Both are extremely powerful, both are combinations of various powers from their respective spectrums. It just kind of fits, and it also takes a step towards further developing the Ultraviolet Lanterns as a concept. And it would absolutely open the door to individual feelings like regret and self-loathing to be lantern powers of their own. Tevya Smoka asks, how do you feel about Tom King's involvement on the upcoming HBO Max Lanterns show? I'm very skeptical of his involvement given his recent track record. Tom King's work can be very hit or miss, even if a lot of the misses are still rooted in good ideas. But when he hits, it's some of the best storytelling and character work you're going to find anywhere in a mainstream comic book. I don't know how much involvement or influence he's actually going to have in crafting this TV show, but if we can get good Tom King, I think that's worth the risk. Toon Magister asks, do you think the ongoing fracturing of the spectrum and all the new emotional lanterns could be a way to introduce the gold lanterns to the timeline? Honestly, I've been waiting for the page turn reveal of a gold lantern since the day the Fractured Spectrum one-shot came out. It seems like such an obvious place to go. A new type of lantern that comes into existence sometime in the future using a power source that's never been defined. Maybe the resolution of all this emotional spectrum turmoil is that all the random loose threads that caused all these new kinds of lanterns to manifest get tied up together and they all somehow combine to make gold. Maybe the creation of the gold lantern is what stabilizes the spectrum, putting things largely back to normal while also leaving us with gold as something separate from the standard emotional spectrum. Bruh Gamer says, you talked about the retcon that lanterns didn't have to recharge every 24 hours. How does that work exactly? Do they just charge it when it gets low instead of in a certain time period? Yep, like a car on a tank of gas. The fuel drains fast or slow depending on how much you use it. The 24-hour time limit was imposed by the Guardians, and it was tied into the central battery and all of the infrastructure on Oa. Then all that blew up in Emerald Twilight, so the ring Ganthet gave to Kyle didn't have any of the usual limitations of a standard Green Lantern Corps ring. It also didn't have any of the benefits either, like serving as a universal translator or communicator or possessing an auto-protect function. All of that went away when Oa fell. When Oa and the Guardians and the Green Lantern Corps eventually came back, the rings got most of their old functionality back, but kept the Kyle era's approach to charging. Blue Fire asks, can a lantern create food and water to sustain themselves and others? No. Ganthet states this pretty definitively in Green Lantern number 99 back in 1998. No matter what you do, the construct is still going to be made of the ring's energy. You can make something permanent, but it's hard and requires a lot more energy, and will still just be a lump of energy that looks like something else. Sadie B asks, has any of the Flash family got a ring before? If so, which Corps were they in? It happened a few times during Blackest Night. Barry became a Blue Lantern, Johnny Quick came back as a Black Lantern, Bart became a Black Lantern and a White Lantern. There was also an issue of Brave and the Bold back in 1999 where Hal gave a temporary Green Lantern ring to Wally West during his Kid Flash days. It's also worth mentioning that Green Lantern Circle of Fire introduced us to Kyle Rayner West, aka Green Lightning, a future descendant of both Kyle and Wally, who inherited Kyle's ring and the West family's speed. Sunday Madubu asks, which ring was Kyle using during his journey to become a White Lantern? Was he using his Green Lantern ring, or was he given a ring by the Corps members of each different Spectrum Corps? And was it his Green Lantern ring that became a White Lantern ring, just like how the new run of Green Lantern, when Kyle suddenly became a White Lantern because of the fractured spectrum? So, let's go over it from the top. Normally, to become a Lantern, a specific emotion has to be your primary character trait. You still feel every other emotion, but there's one that's just way stronger for you. Every Green Lantern is selected because of their above-average level of willpower, except for Kyle. He was selected completely at random, without going through any sort of screening process or receiving any sort of training. And that's important because it means that Kyle Rayner is one of the most emotionally balanced people ever to wear a Green Lantern ring. He strengthened his willpower over time, but he also started out with all of his other emotions pretty strong too, and all of those continue to grow and change as he lived the life of a superhero. Eventually, Kyle reached a point where, in a desperate situation, blue light started coming out of his Green Lantern ring. This led him down a path of training with a member of every Lantern Corps, so that he could understand and control the different powers as they started to come out. Once he finally had a good understanding of all 7 emotions, his Green Lantern ring transformed into a White Lantern ring. And it just stayed as a White Lantern ring from then on, despite still being able to use every emotional power individually. Eventually, though, DC decided to make him just a Green Lantern again. In a very cool moment that doesn't actually make sense, outside forces caused Kyle's White Lantern ring to split into one ring of every color, and they all just fly away seeking new users, except for the green one that stays with Kyle. I guess it's just supposed to be symbolic of Kyle losing the powers of the other emotions, but his ring was never actually a fusion of 7 physical rings. Either way, now he was an ordinary Green Lantern again. Then we get to the Jeremy Adams run, and the emotional spectrum is all messed up. Kyle feels it the worst, since no other Lantern has ever been as in tune with the full spectrum as he was. And maybe it's because the spectrum is so screwy that Kyle was able to start accessing his White Lantern powers again. Although it's apparently very difficult to keep that power under control now, since the entire emotional spectrum is broken and running wild. But it does mean that, just like before, Kyle can channel the different powers through his Green Lantern ring and become a White Lantern. He's just saving it for emergencies, since it takes a tremendous amount of willpower to keep all of that power under control. It's anyone's guess what'll happen when the spectrum eventually stabilizes. Will it become easier to control his White Lantern powers? Will he lose access to those powers entirely? We'll just have to wait and see. Mason wants to know, have you kept up with Absolute Green Lantern or picked up any other Absolute books? And if a group of the Earth Green Lanterns got into a game of Dungeons and Dragons together, what species or class do you think they'd play? Who would be the DM? You know, I'm glad you brought that up. I did a video reviewing the first issue of Absolute Green Lantern, and I liked it. I thought it was really interesting. And then I just never said another word about the series. And that was a while ago. I think issue 5 just came out. And that is purely a scheduling problem. Right now there are 4 Green Lantern series coming out, and I want to make videos about all of them, but making videos takes a lot of time, and they're literally releasing new issues of all these series faster than I can keep up. So I decided to prioritize getting caught up on Green Lantern and Green Lantern Corps, since those are the 2 books that take place in the main DC universe, and those are the storylines my audience would probably care about the most. Whenever I have time beyond that, I've chosen to prioritize Green Lantern Dark, because not only do I really love that series, it's also only 7 issues long and will be over in a few months. Once Green Lantern Dark is done, and I'm reasonably caught up with the Green Lantern and Green Lantern Corps, I'll have time to devote to finally catching up on Absolute Green Lantern. I should probably note that I do have every issue of Absolute Green Lantern that's come out so far, but I've only read the first issue. That's because whenever I cover a series issue by issue, I don't want my opinions of an early issue to be influenced by knowledge of what happens later. The way I feel about issue 2 would likely be a lot different if I already knew what happens in issues 3, 4, and 5. I've somehow managed to avoid spoilers for this long, so hopefully that keeps up until I'm able to finally get going. As for the rest of the Absolute Universe, I've got the first issue of all of them, but I haven't read any of them except for Green Lantern. The ironic truth about running a comic book YouTube channel is that it's so time-consuming that it can be hard to find time to just read comics, unless you're going to be making a video out of those comics. I've managed to mostly avoid spoilers for the Absolute books in general, and I do really want to read them sooner rather than later, especially since it seems like everybody really likes them. As for your D&D question, I think John would be the dungeon master who meticulously crafts scenarios that never get used because the group manages to either break or avoid every storyline John tries to lay out for them. Kyle would never make it past the character creation phase. He'd constantly be changing his class and sketching out what they'd look like, always insisting that he be done in time for the next session. Jessica would be super into this and have a dragonborn barbarian with a detailed backstory that she can't wait to roleplay. Joe would want to continue the story of the half-elf paladin she played back in high school. Simon agreed to join because he thought this might be a fun thing to play with his nephew, and he thinks the orcs look cool. They'd invite Kelly to play, but she'd just call it an old people game and then go back to building her own video game console. Hal and Guy would be throwing a football back and forth on the other side of the room, totally ignoring the game, waiting for everybody to be ready to get food. And lastly, Bob asks, where the hell is Kyle during the Geoff Johns run? I don't know if this is just because it was the return of Hal, but I feel like he only shows up a couple times. It's true that Kyle didn't show up very often in the Geoff Johns run of Green Lantern, but he was still appearing. A lot. He was in Green Lantern Rebirth, the miniseries that brought back Hal and kicked off the return of the Corps. Then as soon as Rebirth was over, Kyle was one of the main characters of the miniseries Green Lantern Corps Recharge, which was all about recruiting a new generation of lanterns before the enemies of Oa could snuff them out. Around the same time, the Rann-Thanagar War miniseries was going on, and both Kyle and Kilowog were sent to try and get a handle on the situation. The Rann-Thanagar War miniseries ended with a one-shot where Kyle became Ion for the second time. This led into an Ion solo series that lasted 12 issues, leading directly into the Sinestro Corps War storyline, which reset Kyle back to being a normal Green Lantern. After the Sinestro Corps War ended, Kyle became one of the main characters in the Green Lantern Corps ongoing series, and that's where he stayed until that series was rebooted for the New 52, at which point Kyle became the main character of the new ongoing series Green Lantern New Guardians. And it just keeps going on like that. Kyle is almost always around, either as a main character or a supporting character. Sometimes he'll disappear for a while, like they all do, but he always comes back. And that'll do it for this batch. If you have a question that you'd like answered, leave it in the comments section down below, and it might be featured in a future video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, so that you'll know when the next installment of this Q&A series comes out, and follow me on Bluesky for more of my thoughts on comics in general. Until next time, thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan. We'll talk again soon.